Hello and welcome to another Friday Expert live stream. I'm your host, Dan Johnson, Chief Consultant here at Next Level Nonprofits, where we help nonprofit leaders launch and grow their nonprofits so you can make an impact in your community. Thanks so much for joining us today, whether you are live on my profile or in our nonprofit Launchpad group, which you can join to see these live streams every single week. This week, we have an incredible guest for you. Kelsey Lyon of Kelsey Lyon Design. Before I bring her on, though, let's talk about a few ground rules for the live stream. Number one, if you're watching this live stream and you love this comment, please mash that react button, love, haha, like, whatever it takes so that this live stream gets in front of as many group members as possible. Number two, if you have a question at any point throughout this live stream, go ahead and drop it right into the comments of the live stream. If you're on the event page, you might need to open it up to full screen in order to drop a comment in on the stream. But go ahead and drop your comments in on the stream. As soon as we see it, we will pull them up on screen and I will ask them of Kelsey at any time during the show. And finally, sit back, enjoy a really awesome expert. She's actually got a presentation for us this week, which is awesome. We don't usually have that. But of course, it is graphic design, so there is that. So I would like to, with no further ado, welcome one, and I am particular when it comes to brand and graphic design people, one of the best brand and graphic designers on the East Coast, Kelsey Lyon.
Hello.
Welcome to the Friday Expert live stream.
I'm so excited, and you hyped that up way more than I deserve, okay?
Not true. Not true. I have seen your design work, and I am thoroughly impressed. And if nonprofits can adopt some of your design work, that will just be incredible. So, my first question for you is, how did you get into graphic design? I've often joked that while I can critique somebody's graphic design, no one should trust me to draw more than stick figures. So how did you get into this world of graphic design?
Well, first of all, my stick figures are pretty okay. Just want to point that out. But so actually, it's kind of funny. I was in high school. And I was trying to find, when you're in high school and you're kind of just like figuring out your purpose in life, it's that super awkward age, right? And I thought I was going to go into cooking. Like that was my thing. I mean, I still love to cook, right? But I really loved cooking and I really loved creativity. And then I was invited to a school newspaper meeting and I was like, oh, all right. Well, I guess
definitely not cooking.
Yeah. I was like, I guess I could try to do this. Well, I started loving it. And the cool thing about my high school is we had a built-in print shop in the basement of our high school where not only did we do the things for the school system itself, but we did it for clients outside of the school system. So we got to like bring in business and things like that. And they only select one student per year to come into that. And so they selected me. So at literally on my 16th birthday, when I was legally allowed to work, I signed papers to work in my very first print shop.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. So I didn't start at like Chick-fil-A or any of that. Although some people accuse me of that. They're like, you started at Chick-fil-A. I was like, no, I just say my pleasure. So I started there and then I interned in screen printing shops because I figured if I'm going to dive into this whole world of graphic design is so broad, right? You need to understand the printing process. You need to understand how colors work. You need to understand a whole bunch of different things. So I went at 16 from, just printing like booklets and things like that to screen printing t-shirts, heat pressing, laying vinyl. I wanted to understand all of it, right? And because a lot of graphic designers, they go, oh, this looks great. But is it going to print well? Is it going to be on the side of a billboard well? Is it going to be on a car well? So it was things like that. And then fast forward, I ended up going to Central Connecticut State University. And I got my my bachelor's degree in graphic and information design. And then I worked in graphic design throughout my entire 4 years in college. And I wanted discounted printing. So I worked at Staples and made it up to like corporate office consultant type of person. So that was really cool.
Did you get a good discount though?
I did get a good discount. And like I got to print it until it was right rather than charging. Yeah, it was great. So that was really cool. And then I ended up going completely out on my own and only doing this for my business back in 2019. So, and I've been flourishing ever since.
Well, and what's interesting about your business too is you focus a lot on small and medium nonprofits and businesses. So, what stands out to you? Because that market, that's our market, but there's not a lot of people's market. Most people want to go work for the big firms and do graphic design for Coca-Cola and things like that. Why do you focus on small businesses and nonprofits?
So I am accused of having a really big heart. So I want to root for the little guy, right? So there's a need when it comes to nonprofits especially, but also small businesses where they're going to just buy a logo off of Fiverr or something like that, and then that's going to be their logo because they can't afford some large marketing firm to come in and spend $30,000 to rebrand them and, come up with a marketing strategy and all of that stuff. I have the knowledge of those large businesses and all those things, and I can take that and funnel that down to make small businesses successful, to make nonprofits successful. I don't want to see the little guy have not great graphic design work or not great marketing. And then that really affects their business. I mean, I tell businesses all the time, your first step, after your business plan and all that stuff is you need to start coming up with your brand. Because what nonprofits or small businesses typically do is they get that Fiverr and then they go and say, oh, well, now I can afford to hire someone good. Well, then we end up rebranding them and we're starting their branding identity completely over, which can be really good, but it also can hurt them somewhat with brand recognition. So I really want them to succeed from the get-go.
Well, that's something that I've been lucky to have a brand mentor. And so all of my nonprofits had that $30,000 brand look. Yeah. And that was incredible. That made us stand out from the crowd. That made everybody kind of walk up to us and go, wow, you're really good at what you do. And or, wow, you're really grassroots. Because sometimes it's not always about looking good. It's always about looking accurate.
Yes.
And when we actually looked too good in one of our brands once and got accused of being run by the Koch brothers because we were such a good looking brand for such a grassroots kind of approach.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to have you on. And what really the goal for me in this episode for the nonprofit leaders listening, hey, Terry and your team from Safe Spokane out in Washington State, they're listening. They do an amazing job. They help people in crisis who need their dog taken care of and fostered for like a couple of weeks to go to the emergency room or whatever. Amazing group of people. I know they're listening. I know a couple of the people I see in the chat here are listening. So good to see you guys. And what I really want to get for them is, nonprofits famously suck at graphic design. Like, just frankly, right out the gate, honestly, usually the way it's a nonprofit is the graphic design is terrible. You look at it and you're like, okay, somebody hand drew this. They must be a nonprofit. Where's their donate button? Yeah. But we're out here to create a generation of successful, impactful nonprofits and really raise the professionalism standard. So I really want to turn over the broadcast to you to talk a little bit about what are the basics of graphic design and how does a nonprofit on a $0 budget create graphic design that's actually going to be worth looking at.
Yeah, of course. So if you want to throw up my lovely presentation, excellent. Okay. So Dan gave me like 30 minutes. I'm just kidding. It was like 8 hours to say, hey, but if you want to show some things, I'm like, yeah, why not? So basically what I did is I took the basic design principles that I follow and that I learned and that I have walked out. And I'm going to show the impacts of those, show the differences of those. And then I'm going to turn that over into the brand strategy when we come to consistency. So basic design principles. We need balance, we need contrast, we need hierarchy, and we need consistency. So hierarchy is important. So if you notice, we have hierarchy in this graphic alone, right? But the purpose of hierarchy is to create visual consistency for the brand. And you want to draw people's eye to what's like the first thing you want them to see, right? Big, bold, the spacing is accurate. That's what you want to see first. So if you notice, hierarchy is the whole point of this slide, right? So we want to know that the necessary information, but then what comes second, one comes third, right? So also, just side note, it's going to look like something visually threw up. My animations don't work in StreamYard, so I am really, really sorry. This was supposed to be animated. My apologies. You should not have seen all of this all at once. Okay, so part of hierarchy, right, is we're creating contrast, which was another one of the design principles. So if you notice the headline hierarchy, it's bold, it's large, it's condensed. It doesn't always have to be condensed, right? And it's in all caps. All caps does not always mean that we're screaming at you. Yes, we live in a texting society where if we scream something all caps, we are literally yelling, but we're not necessarily yelling. The reason why people use all caps a lot of times in headlines is because the X height of your letters are all visually consistent. They are all the same. So it basically makes a rectangle, which is so much easier on the eye for the eye to digest. If you notice the subheader, it's less bold, it's less in your face, it's not condensed. I went ahead and used a different font. I kept the all caps because it is still important. It's just the second thing that I want you to see, right? And then the paragraph is it's not bolded. Now, in a paragraph, you can bold certain words. Let's say you're doing a quote graphic of some sort and you want, let's say, the word consistency to be bolded. You can bold that, and that is totally okay. But you'll notice that this is in sentence case. So the only thing that's capitalized really is the first word of the sentence, unless there is a name or, typical grammar rules, correct? So I also,
if I'm accurate here, just to make sure I understand.
Go for it.
Basically, hierarchy is about where do you want the eye to go?
Yes.
And you go bigger and bolder and all caps are where kind of the thought process you want the eye to follow when you're doing graphic design.
Yep. Exactly. And what I see a lot of nonprofits and small businesses, and even people who just share quote graphics, everything is the same size and there's no hierarchy. So I don't even know what to look at, right? And then it also, and we'll talk about white space later, but it also makes it to where there's like no white space virtually. So I have no idea what to look at first, right? So another thing with contrast is it could be an example where, like I have at the bottom, where we're going to do some knockout text, right? We're going to do a dark background with light. And then that's the thing that makes it visually appealing. And then underneath it is where we put a lot of that body copy and things like that. Let's talk about balance. Okay, so another thing that I see a lot of people doing, and it's actually one of my biggest pet peeves, is centering everything. People think that just because you center something, it means that it's balanced, right? People think of like a teeter-totter, right? If everything is centered, then things aren't tilting this way, right? Well, actually, psychologically, if you don't start all of your text in the same line, your eye has a harder time digesting it. So centering a headline is okay, right? And even a headline with a subheader that's okay, right? But if you're going to have a bunch of body copy, how much harder is the one on the right? Well, my right. How much is that one harder to read than the one on the left, right? The one on the left, everything starts in the same exact spot. So balance doesn't always mean a teeter-totter. It just means that we want to make sure that everything is balanced. Now, let's say this was a graphic of some sort. We had hierarchy is important, and I still needed to put my lovely next level double arrows up here in the brand. Up in the top right corner, very small, would be a very good place to put that, right? If I wanted to put my brand over on hierarchy is important with the centered, where am I going to put it? Well, the only place I really could put it is on the bottom, super small, which is going to make it look like a tower that's about to tilt over, right? Because not only do we read the words that are on the screen, we read shapes. We see all of the shapes, we see what we're supposed to read. So part of that is making sure that everything is completely balanced, right? Did all that make sense, Dan? Because I get on a ramble about centered text.
No, I think it absolutely did. You're basically, you want to make it as easy as possible for the eye to read what you're doing. And for each of the future ones, just define the concept. I don't think we defined hierarchy when we jumped into this, but if you can define the concept for the future ones, I think that'll help. I caught up about 2 minutes in, but I think that'll help.
Perfect. All right. So consistency is something else that is key, right? So I am using the hierarchy as important example for everything right now, just so you guys can see it doesn't have to be super fancy, right? But we have to be consistent. And so if you notice, I'm using the same color scheme, I'm using the same fonts on both examples, but this one on the right is a little punchier, it's a little bolder, it's getting your attention more. The one on the left is very much, a neutral colored background. It's got the gray and things like that. So they're both on brand. It's just, what am I using the graphic for? Something that a lot of people ask me when it comes to social media is, the Instagram grid. Everyone's afraid of the Instagram grid because you look at the grid, and if you have a whole bunch of words all at once or a whole bunch of the same background, people get very confused and it's very overwhelming. So usually what I like to tell people is, the nice light and airy backgrounds, if that's your brand, do it for all of them, except for maybe something really punchy that you want to get their attention overall on an Instagram grid. For one of the nonprofits we did donate. So all of our donate stuff is the darker background, but everything else is the lighter. So when I look at that overall grid, or even on Facebook or anything like that, that's the thing that grabs people's attention. Let's see. So examples of consistency. So I create brand guidelines for any nonprofit or small business. And so here's just some pieces of what those brand guides look like, because otherwise they can be a little bit overwhelming. Usually what I do is I break it down: colors, typography, design elements, things like that. So this one is an example.
Can you have you pause on this a little bit and step back? So for the nonprofits who are listening, branding is one of the keys to graphic design consistency. So can you break down, like, what are the 5 elements of a brand or 4 elements of a brand, and then go into what needs to be in the brand guide, essentially?
Yeah, of course. So when it comes to branding, people usually just think that it's logos, right? They come up with one logo. A lot of times they come up with one logo and maybe it's the opposite colored logo. So one is on a light background, one is on a dark background. I will use a perfect example. Something right now on Dan's live stream is he has his logo mark, right? So everyone thinks Nike, right? Nike swoosh. That's their logo mark. You see the Nike swoosh, you know that that's Nike, right? So with Dan's brand, he's using the double arrows pointing up for next level. So I don't necessarily need to put next level on everything. I have my logo mark similar to Nike, right? So a lot of people think that that's just your brand, and then you can kind of play with colors as you want to, and you can play with fonts and all those things. But in reality, you have to make sure that your color is consistent. Colors are consistent. Your typography needs to be consistent, right? Your messaging, which that's a whole nother topic for a whole nother day, is messaging, but your messaging is consistent. Your shapes are consistent. You want to make sure that you have consistency in everything. And people think that, oh, well, everyone's going to get bored if everything that I do is green, right? But what we do is we give other colors that complement the brand. So not necessarily is everything lime green. We'll give you other colors and other fonts and things like that. So that way you can kind of intermix while still being consistent. Perfect. So this one is just a small piece. So something when setting up a brand guide too, I always make sure that my color swatches are Pantone color swatches. So Pantone is a color book that you can actually order the book but you can give it to screen printers. You can give it to printing companies with printing presses. You can give the colors to whoever you want, and your color will be the same exact color on everything. So think Coca-Cola red, right? Coca-Cola will pay people to go around the country and find if their red is starting to fade, right? And they will issue them new signage or whatever it is to make sure that it is their Pantone, their Coca-Cola red, right? So it's very important that your colors are your colors. Now, if I go and I have like a lime green on my computer screen, but I go get a sign printed and I say, oh, just make it, this is the hex number. They're going to try their hardest to match it as best as possible, but it may come out a completely different color. And I'll give an example of that. One of the nonprofits I worked for, it was red, white, and blue because it was a law enforcement nonprofit, right? And so we did red, white, and blue. And we got some items printed and they were screen printed, and the blue came out purple. So it looked like it was like almost like an indigo. And that's not what we were going for, right? On the screen, it looks like this really pretty blue, but not when it prints, it comes out purple because, you know, printing something versus on the screen, they use two different, one is RGB, one is CMYK. So they're going to translate different. So a way to stop that is picking a Pantone color. So all of the colors, go ahead, Dan, did you want to say something?
Go ahead, finish, and then I got a question to bring up from one of our members.
Okay. So all of the colors, I give not only the Pantone swatch number, because it comes with a number with a letter, and then I also give the hex number, so you can plug those in. And then I usually give a usage. So I will pick, you know, primary background color is going to be this, or primary text color, if we're using headers, are going to be this. And then
how do you select your colors? So you know, I was noticing, for example, on some of the previous slides that the darker gray blended in a little bit to the lighter gray. How do you select colors so that they contrast with each other and they don't burn people's eye out? Like if you've ever seen hot pink and yellow as a on anything, you feel like your eyes have been seared. So how do I, as a nonprofit, pick good contrasting colors to work together?
You said hot pink and yellow, and my eyeballs just started burning, and I wasn't even looking at it. So when I start branding a company or choosing colors, I go emotion based. So this is a little bit different. I go emotion based. So what is the emotion that you're trying to get out of your audience, right? So I'll give an example, and actually one of my slides has it. There we go. So when I am looking at colors, I am looking at the positive and negative qualities of different colors and then how they interact with the other colors. So you'll see do not use, and this was just an example from a nonprofit that I branded. So we did go black. Black is typically the color of death and war. So I try not using black unless it's warranted. This one, we actually needed it for the high contrast because it had power in the name. And so we were trying to evoke that. So that was a little bit different. But then to contrast that dark, we went with blue, which is the color of trust and loyalty. And then we went with green, which showed growth, right? And so next level, it's showing growth. So you have the right emotional color, right? So from there, then I look at different shades and how they're going to interact with each other. Your example of pink and yellow, because we have yellow and gold in this brand guide, I tell them do not, under any circumstances, use pink. I don't want to create that. Even if we are doing some kind of Valentine's Day something, I try to stay away from that if you're gonna use the brand colors. Sometimes what people do, let's say for Christmas, is they want to do some kind of something with Santa on it and stuff like that. Then we just alter the brand color for that one thing rather than next level. having their double arrows, making it look like a Christmas tree next to Santa, like it could start to create some visual inconsistencies, right? So we do have some of those times where, yes, we're going to need that, but really we want to create the same consistency altogether.
All right. I want to bring on a question from Denise over at Cebus Mission out of Maryland. She says, what questions are good to ask a graphic designer to know if they are a good quality designer?
So I get asked that question a lot. And I run teams of designers for different campaigns that I do. And one of the very first, and someone might throw something at me for this one, so just be prepared, Dan. One of the first questions, if they say that they are an actual branding and graphic designer and they're going to come in and do things, I ask them what programs they use. That is one of my first questions, because if they say Canva, I know that Canva does not have the ability to do certain things that we're going to need if we're trying to create visual brand consistency. Canva is great for many things, but if they are trying to sell you on, I will brand you, and they say that they use Canva, I would shy away from that, or I would start asking some deeper questions. I would ask them how they select their colors and font choices, to be honest. If they start talking about target demographics, if they start talking about your audience and some of the things that you'll hear me say today, then that is a good option. If they say, I use these fonts because they've worked for previous clients, that's not a good answer, right? Everything that I do is actually, even though it's creative, it's very logical, right? So I'm finding colors based on emotion, and then I'm working them out together, right? It's almost like a formula. But if I just pick colors because they're your favorite color, I can't tell you how many times people have said, okay, I want my brand to be purple because that's my favorite color. I don't care what your favorite color is. I really don't. I just want to know what kind of brand you want to have, what emotions you want to evoke, what do you want people to take you seriously, right? Do you want it to be a feminine brand? Do you want it to be a very serious brand? Is it very corporate? Is it not? Those are the things that I want to know. I don't want to know what your freaking favorite color is, right? So if they ask you your favorite color, that is also a red flag to run far into the night.
That's totally fair. That's totally fair. And as we head into the halfway point, where Kelsey is actually going to have a giveaway, we do this for anybody who actually watches live. Kelsey will have a free giveaway for you in a moment. But as we head into the halfway point of the broadcast, let me ask you, because I want to share mine, so it's selfish. But let me ask you, what is your favorite book on branding and or graphic design?
Okay, so this is really funny. There are quite a few books that I read, and I have an entire shelf of them, and there's one that I don't read the books. So I find the books from like Herb Lubalin and like super great graphic designers from back in the day, and I stare at logos. And that's my thing. I don't know. I'm not necessarily
the graphic designers who stare at logos instead of the men who stare at goats.
Right, exactly. Yes. Yeah. And then I also have, and this is so funny, and I wish that I brought it over. Maybe after the break, I'll grab it. But I actually have a Pantone book that literally looks like it's a children's book. And so my kids love it too. But I have like all the different color swatches of yellow. And I'll sit there and stare at it and use it. I use picture and color books. People ask me to boil my career down to like a one sentence, and I'm like, guys, I color for a living. That's just usually me. I am not one to go and be like, yeah, I'm going to read a 400-page book on graphic design. Much like this presentation, I'd rather show you guys, I'd rather visually see it than read about it.
That's totally fair. It's totally fair. And I do see some other questions in the chat, which we will get to immediately after the mid break. And then Kelsey Lyon will continue with her 5 basics of graphic design that you need, and I'll not interrupt quite as much. My recommendation for a book, just if you guys do read, for those of us who do, if you guys do read, my recommendation would be Primal Branding, the 7 pieces that you need to create a cult following around your brand. Fantastic, well worth the read, and also short, because while I read books, I don't read long ones. So
I might read that one then.
Thank you everyone for popping into the live stream, and we are getting toward the end of the year. And if you've been thinking about launching your nonprofit, now is the time. This is the time to get it in and to get it in and to get your nonprofit set up before January 1st so that you can roll into next year with a launch party, with a launch event, with getting everyone excited about how they're going to use their New Year's resolutions, not to get more swole, I think is the word, at the gym, but to actually invest in their communities and change their community with you. So if you're thinking about launching a nonprofit, go to nextlevelnonprofits.us, set up a 30-minute call with us, and we'll chat. We'll help you put together a game plan for launching your nonprofit, whether you do it on your own or whether you come to us. And if you're watching this and you're like, I've already got my nonprofit referred, or launched, congratulations. If you refer someone to us, I give out 1 hour of free coaching on either growing your nonprofit or on fundraising to anyone who brings someone into Next Level. So that's your recommendation for sending people to Next Level. I will get better at this ad as time goes on. All right, it is the middle of the broadcast, which means our guest has a free giveaway for you. So I'm going to bring Kelsey back up on the stage, talk a little bit about it.
Yay! Hi, everybody. So I usually like to do giveaways when I go on podcasts as well. So that was perfect. So what I am giving away is a free consultation with myself. And something Dan doesn't know is whatever you book with me on the very first interaction, whether it's branding or you need a design consultation for a few days or whatever that may be, you will get 10% off your very first booking as well. So I am very excited. The way that you can do that is my website, which I will give at the end of the presentation, but I'll tell you now, it's kelseylyon.design. And if you go to kelseylyon.design/promotion, you can actually schedule that call with me. So that is my lovely gift to you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kelsey. That is awesome and exciting. I just dropped that link in there, kelseylyon.design/promotion. And now back to the 5 basic things you need to do in your graphic design to create stunning visual design on a $0 budget. Kelsey, you have the floor.
Whoop, whoop. All right, we're going back. All right, so I talked a whole bunch about color already. And so next, I just want to talk about typography. I don't typically call it fonts. If it's a designer, if they call it typography, green flag. They call it fonts, red flag. Just kidding.
Oh, let me interrupt you real quick because I almost forgot Tashimia with Fight AAA that fights alcoholism, addiction, and anxiety, I believe, are the 3 A's. Correct me if I'm wrong, Tashimia. But she asks, how do you feel about nonprofits having other logos to signify their other projects?
I've been asked this question actually quite a few times. So there is a way of doing it correctly. So we talked a lot about consistency, right? And brand consistency. So if you use similar colors, similar fonts, similar overall look and feel, that's okay, right? Sometimes what I've seen people do is they will have enter nonprofit name here, and then with handwriting underneath, they put whatever the subsection is. So it could be action, it could be women, it could be any type of demographic. And obviously, you can change branding a little bit, like change colors around. Let's say you started a nonprofit for alcoholism, but you wanted part of your nonprofit to gear towards women. If you keep the same fonts at that point and the same stylings and overall consistency, you can alter the colors a little bit to reach that demographic, and that's okay. But what you don't want to do is have your overall brand and you're creating basically 5 different brands all under this one umbrella, because what that does is it makes it not consistent for your readers, and it makes them think that you're a separate company than this other company. And you'll have to answer that question over and over again. That's, oh, well, I thought you worked for X. Oh, well, I do. This is just a subset of that. Oh, okay. And it could create some issues.
Awesome.
Perfect. Okay. So typography. Whenever I give someone a style guide or a branding guide, I always pick out what their heading should be. I'll give them an alternative sometimes too. And the reason for that is sometimes if you create visual graphics and things like that, and you go to translate that to your website, sometimes the fonts that you use in your visuals aren't necessarily what you can find for a web font. So a lot of times I will give an alternative that matches pretty closely to it, but it gives you the capabilities to still have that. Otherwise, you're then searching, well, I can't find Bebas Neue. It's not a web font. So what do I do? Right. And then I always do subheadings and paragraphs. Something else that I do is I do handwriting. And a lot of times, especially if you're doing quote graphics, people want it to look like someone signed something, right? So Dan Johnson gave this awesome quote, and it's from Dan. And sometimes they put their actual signature, which is lovely. But sometimes they just put like Dan Johnson, right? I always assign a handwriting font, because what I've seen is people will want to do it to bring some visual contrast. The problem is they'll use one here on social, one here on something else, one over here, and none of them look the same. And then I also want to make sure that it's consistent with their brand, because a lot of handwriting fonts can get very scripty and almost looks like a wedding invitation. And some of them don't start at the same baseline, which can also bring visual inconsistencies. So if you notice in this one, it's handwriting. It literally looks like someone wrote it, but it doesn't look like a kindergartner wrote it, like Comic Sans does. Please don't ever use Comic Sans. And then it doesn't look like it's on a wedding invitation. It looks like someone wrote it with a brush pen and they're giving their sign off. This nonprofit, I don't always give a stencil font, right? But this nonprofit, they work on different cases. And so we wanted to bring a case closed stamp kind of a look for some of their graphics. And so I assigned the stencil font for them. That way the stencil looked the same in all of them. Again, I don't always do that, but in this instance, I went ahead and did it. I will also, this also looks, again, I didn't have my animation, so I'm really sorry. It's going to look really crazy. So I always worry about spacing too. So a lot of times, the fonts that we assign, so you'll notice like headings and subheadings, it's very condensed. So sometimes I'll want that to breathe a little bit, right? We want graphics and fonts, we want them to breathe. We don't want them to breathe too much, right? But if it's called leading is the term we use for lines, the space in between each line. And then kerning is the space in between each letter. So if your kerning is too tight, you actually can't read it very well. And then if it's too big, what ends up happening is you can't tell where the space is. So it just looks like one giant word when really it's not. So you want to kind of find that happy medium. And some fonts have like a built-in super tight kerning, and I don't like it. And so I try to open it up a little bit more. Same with leading. And it's funny because Dan and I have worked a couple projects in the past, and our biggest thing is, oh, there's too many words because there's not enough space in between all the lines. If it looks like you tried to jam in too much, you probably have too many words, right? So you want to make sure that you have some very breathable room in there. And we'll, again, talk about white space, but you want to make sure that people can breathe a sigh of relief. It's very much like the magenta and yellow concept, where if you have pink and yellow on the same screen, you're like tense, right? It's the same thing with spacing. If there's too many words, you're like, oh, I don't know what to do. So that is that example. So I always assign this for clients. I did create this for one of the nonprofits. I created some examples of what their social media templates could look like. Because one of the things was they have power in the name. And so we wanted their graphics to also exude power. So everything that we did kind of had a slant where everything was growing. And it brings your eye in a certain direction. Or there's an arrow that points to it. So I actually assigned those and I showed them all the different templates that they could use. So that's just an example of things that you could do, is have templates already done. And then you can assign your hierarchy and they're very quick then to bust out, right? If I need a really quick quote graphic, okay, I'm going to pick that second from the bottom one. I'm going to put a header. I'm going to put a signature at the bottom and I'm going to put the words. I'm going to make sure the header is significantly bigger and bolder. And I'm good, right? So we talked about color already, but one of the things that I see nonprofits do, and actually businesses do a lot of, is they don't check the contrast of their colors. So they see a light blue, they see a yellow, and they're like, oh, I love that color, right? Well, the problem is there are a significant amount of people in this country that are visually impaired. It could be color blindness. It could be that they don't see color as well. It could be on a screen on a phone. It looks super, super bright, but when you print it, it looks darker. So there is a reference that I run every color combination for a brand through, and that's webaim.org/resources/contrast checker. And I can throw that in the chat later too. And so what I do is I make sure that they are readable, right? So it gives it a score and it will light up green if it passes accessibility, right? If it passes the contrast check. So it will tell me what passes. So my blue shade and my on a white background passes, right? Black with the blue, it passes. But if I go over here, this light blue color on a white background does not pass. So I know that there are going to be people that, even though I love this light blue color, it doesn't matter because now maybe 20% of my audience can't read it, or 10% of my audience. But you want to make sure that your audience can read it no matter what. An example of that is right here. I can't really see that light yellow. I don't know if many people can, right? I can't see it. There's not enough visual contrast. But if I look at the gold underneath, which really is just that light yellow shade, just darker, I can see that, right? And so that's what we want to make sure. And I'll give an example. I know a client that I worked for, they loved this color. It was a light blue color. They loved it. It was their favorite color and they wanted it. And I could not tell them otherwise. And that's okay, right? So we printed yard signs for them. And the biggest feedback that we got was the white logo on this bright blue. I couldn't see it 10 feet down the road. So it doesn't just apply to screens, right? It applies to print material. If I can't read a sign from way down the road, what's the purpose of the sign? What's the purpose of the billboard if I can't read it from way down the highway? Because I have 3 seconds to get my audience's attention. If I'm only giving them 1.5 because they have to get closer, are they actually going to read it at that point? Probably not. And I can tell you one of the colors that is the hardest, and that's why I used it, is yellow. A lot of people try to do yellow text on a white background and it does not work. You could do gold and darken it a little bit, but it does not work. And that's because people can't read it most of the time. And it also very much shouts at you. That's another thing. That's it on color. I can go on and on for days on color. Typography though. So I wanted to show you the differences in sans serif, serif, and handwriting fonts. Because a lot of times people say that they're going to use a certain font because it looks good, or I'm not going to use that one because it looks boring, right? Legibility is your biggest goal when picking typography, right? You want to make sure someone can read it, first of all. So typically sans serif fonts, they're more legible, especially on screens. So studies have shown that screen visibility, if you use a serif typeface for body copy, like in a text message, people aren't going to be able to read it as much. So you notice that all of our iMessaging and Facebook Messenger, unless you manually change it, they are all in sans serif because it is much easier to read, right? You also have a wider demographic reach because you are hitting Gen Z, you're hitting millennials, you're hitting all of those different demographics because they can all read it. Whereas if you go a serif typeface, what happens is those look most times more corporate. Your demographic is typically older. A lot of people, if they see a serif typeface, their instant feeling is lawyer, right? Something very serious, right? And while, yes, nonprofits and businesses are very serious, you want them to be welcomed to your brand. So there are many cases where a serif is okay, right? Because if that is your target demographic, I'll give you an example. One of the nonprofits that I did, we do use a serif typeface. We make sure that the serifs are readable. So serifs are those little tails at the end of the letter, right? And so we make sure that they are very pronounced because sometimes they'll be very, very skinny and you can't see them. So we use that because the demographic is typically older that we're reaching out to. And so we went ahead and did that, right? But a lot of times with brands that we're trying to reach a very broad audience, I'm using a sans serif typeface. Now, when it comes to handwriting, they look elegant. They look pretty. The problem is that Gen Z, they're not really learning cursive. So if you use a handwriting font for all of your headers, you run a chance that people aren't going to be able to read it, especially in Gen Z. Millennials, I'm a millennial. We learned cursive, but my daughter's 13 and she's not learning cursive in school. We're manually teaching it to her. But that's where people run into an issue is they think it looks pretty, and it does, but you have to make sure that people are going to be able to read it. So if you're going to use a handwriting font, you have to make sure that it is super, super legible, right? So you'll notice that in the handwriting font that I gave, the R still looks like an R. It doesn't look like a cursive R. It looks like the letter R. So even though they're all connected, I could show that to my teenager right now, and she's going to be able to know that that says handwriting, right? So you're getting the effect without it being super crazy. So an example of this, because people say contrast in typography, I will do headers, usually in sans serif fonts. That's typically what I go for. But you can do your body copy in a serif font. It is okay to have some serif and some sans serif as long as they are consistent, right? You are always using your body copy as sans serif or serif. Because if you think newspapers, if you think magazines, you think print, a lot of people do use serifs, right? So there is this back and forth. But let's say I want a specific call to action and I want someone to sign up for something, right? I can use a handwritten font so it looks like I'm signing up for something. Or I want them to donate, I can do that because it looks like I wrote it to them. Like it has that personal touch of, hey, I just wrote you a thank you letter, right? Here's my message to you, rather than it looking as typed. So there are times where that is okay. So really quick, I want to talk white space because I know this is Dan's favorite subject on this planet. White space is good, guys. It's great. Again, this was supposed to animate, but white space, you'll notice on the left, it breathes.
What is white space? Can you explain white space? Because this is one of the number one things I see nonprofits screw up.
Yes. So white space is where there's nothing in that space. So if you notice, I have brackets. So that's my pretend logo, right? So my pretend logo is the brackets. So I have my pretend logo, and on the bottom, I have my typography. But if you notice, all up in the top and all to the right of my pretend logo, it's empty. Why? Because I want the focus to be on white space is good, right? That's my headline. I want my focus to be there. No, it doesn't always have to be on the bottom, right? But white space is your friend. You notice too that I have some white space next to the word good because I want everything left aligned. If I centered this here, that would look really awkward. Then I'd be forced to take that logo and put it in the center. Well, now I just lost a ton of my white space, right? You want things to breathe. One of my clients is actually a real estate agent, real estate company in Palm Beach, Florida. And luxury is their thing, right? It's a very luxurious market. They don't sell anything under $1 million. And one of the biggest things that we do is we take things out of their current designs. We take it out. We don't list the prices. We don't list this. We don't list that. We will list this is where it was and it's sold and have a picture in their logo. Very simple, because we want the property to speak for itself. If you look to the right, oh, well, white space is good. Well, I'm going to underline that because that's going to draw attention to it. And then I have my logo and it needs to be bigger because it needs to fill the space. And then, oh, there's this awkward space over here. So I'm just going to stick a star there because I think it looks good. No, white space is your friend. It is very much your friend. And also, if you are doing, let's say, social media graphics, this is something I see nonprofits do. They want to put all of the typography in it. They want to fill that box for Instagram chock full. There is a balance there, right? If I do a headline with my logo, like the left side does, if I have that in my caption, I can go ahead and go more into detail. But if I try to put all of that onto the graphic, people won't read it. They'll scroll because that's too much. An example of this today that I did for a cleaning company is 10% of Americans are looking for a cleaning company to come in and clean their houses rather than them doing it themselves. So I put the statistic and their logo, and I went into detail in the caption because I want to grab their attention and make them stop and make them want to read it rather than reiterating what's in the graphic in the caption. And that was all of my pet peeves in one presentation.
Fantastic. So can you really quickly maybe go to the summary slide or really quickly summarize what are the 5 things that if you're a nonprofit graphic designer, you need to keep in mind when you are creating stunning and well done graphic design?
Yes, I'm going to go back. Okay. So I'm going to go back to the 4 key design principles because these are really the things that you need to keep in mind. And this goes to everything that we just talked about in a branding guide, right? Everything needs to be balanced. Everything needs to have contrast, right? Not everything needs to be a stop sign in high contrast, but you do need to have some kind of visual contrast between information. An example of that was our sans serif header with our sans serif body copy. That's an example of contrast. So we want to make sure that all of our information has some sort of contrast to establish our hierarchy, right? And then after that, it's consistency. So your brand needs to be on everything, right? Don't create a graphic that doesn't have at least your logo mark on it. But you need to make sure that everything is consistent. So we're using the same colors and typography and overall look and feel. We want to make sure that all of that is visually consistent. So when someone is scrolling through social media, let's say, or someone picks up your flyer or your business card, they can look at your social post and go, oh, that's that company. I know that automatically. Oh, let's see what they're up to now. And they'll look at it. Everyone knows Nike Just Do It, right? Everyone knows that. Everyone sees the Nike swoosh and they're like, that's Nike. And it's almost become a status symbol in some ways, right? But with nonprofits, we have to do the same thing. We have to be creating that visual consistency and brand recognition, because if we don't, we're doing a disservice. We're losing donations, right? We're not going to get as high of donations. And you talked about something earlier, Dan, which I think is really crucial. Not everything needs to look like a super corporate brand, right? you can have visual consistency without it looking corporate. Because sometimes, yes, that does turn people off, right? I think of the church example. If you have a really good logo on your church, that's awesome. But if everything is branded, people go, are you a mega church? Are you trying to branch out? And that could turn some people off, right? We got that. But we want to make sure that the consistency and all of those design principles are followed so people do take you completely seriously.
That is great. We've got a couple other questions in the chat too. First one is, what's the range of cost for a good quality logo?
All right. So that's my favorite question because my husband gets mad at me because I severely undercharge myself. If someone says they're going to create a logo for you that's $100, it's probably not going to be terrific quality. If someone charges you $500 for a logo, probably, because they're not going to give you just one logo. If they're worth it, they're not giving you just, here's your logo. They're giving you a single color version that you then can go put on t-shirts to save your nonprofit some money, because that's something that nonprofits have to do, right? Is save money. They're giving you a vertical version, a horizontal version. They're giving you a light version, a dark version. They're giving you a logo kit. They're not just giving you, here's your logo, and I made it in Procreate, right? That is something I would say you're probably looking at a couple $100. Typically, if you're just doing a logo, that's what it's going to cost. But you want to try to do logo with some branding guidelines and things like that. So you start establishing that consistency, or you can do it based off of your logo. I've been hired where it's, here's the logo. Can you create me a branding guide? Absolutely, I can. So yeah, I would say that's roughly it. Now, if someone's going to charge you $10,000 for a logo as a nonprofit, I wouldn't do that.
That's very fair. And actually, I'm going to drop in to the chat the link to an article that I did earlier this year. What does it really cost to start a nonprofit in 2023? Which does cover branding and logos and graphic design. So you guys can check that out at your leisure. Let's see. We've got one other question. You mentioned Canva should be avoided, but what programs for graphic design are your go-to? I don't think you were saying that the nonprofit should avoid using Canva once they have a graphic design. Just avoid using it for the graphic design, right?
Right. So one of the things so I'll go on my Canva spiel. Canva is good for social media templates on the fly, right? Because you already have your logo done. You already have all of that done. And so it's very easy to share with your team in Canva, and that's okay. I use Adobe Creative Suite. One of the things that I always make sure of with my logos, and this is kind of going into the weeds, but it's very important, is that it is properly typeset. So if you type something into Microsoft Word, let's say, it's actually not properly typeset at all. And the way that you can tell that is put a T next to an A, right? There's way too much space in between the T and the A, or the Y and the A. And so I actually convert everything to outline, so it makes it a shape. And I actually hand typeset every single letter in a logo. That is something that you cannot do in Canva. So I urge people to not do that in Canva, at least creating the logos, but social media, creating a brochure, creating a reel for Instagram, creating a TikTok, things like that. If you need to use that, that's fine. Adobe is what I use primarily Illustrator, because it does work in vectors. And vectors basically means I could take your logo, blow it up the size of a building, and you won't see a pixel, right? So I use Illustrator primarily, but there is new software through Adobe now. They're trying to compete with Canva, and it's called Adobe Express. It's free to use. You get all of the capabilities, basic capabilities of like Photoshop and things like that, all in Adobe Express. And you can load those vectors and AI files and PSD files into there if that's what your designers send you. So it's free. And then if you want the Premiere, it's like $10 a month. I'm not advocating or paid by Adobe. That's just when we go to design school, that's what we use, right? We were not taught in Canva.
No, that's totally fair. And before I announce the next guest, because believe it or not, I actually have the next guest scheduled this week, which is a huge
Ooh.
accomplishment for me. It's not like racing at the end of the week. Before I announce the next guest, how can people work with you as a graphic designer if they want your help building their brand or helping them produce better graphics for their nonprofit?
So if you would like to book me, which actually, Dan, if you wouldn't mind putting up my slideshow super fast, just so people can jot down my website. Boop. How many slides is this thing? There we go. Oh, it didn't load. That's okay. It's kelseylyon.design. So my first and last name .design. Or it's my super long name is kelseyliondesigns.com. Either one will send you to my website. If you want to hire me for branding, there's a button that says branding questionnaire. You can fill that out. Or you can click the contact link and that will go directly to me and we could book a consultation. I do have a lot of people, they just want to show me what they have. And they ask me, hey, can you just give me some quick tips on what we're doing and how we can just make this better, right? I'm open to that. Most of the guests here if you watch this live, you're getting 30 minutes with me for free. But if not, it's a $50 consultation and I will look at whatever you have for an hour. So
Which is ridiculously affordable, by the way.
yes.
Like if you know nothing about graphic design and branding, utterly ridiculously affordable, like almost head shaking affordable.
Yes. And I do that. And my husband shakes his head at me. He's like, you're worth so much more than that. And I'm like, yes, but I root for the little guy, right? I want it to be affordable. So that way you guys don't feel like, oh, well, I got to come up with all this money so I can pay her because she's a professional. I want you guys to be able to come to me and say, hey, I really want my logo redone, or I really want this. And I'll give you a fair rate on it.
That makes perfect sense. Kelsey, thank you so much for joining the live stream. It has been absolutely wonderful having you. And it was the first time having a full-fledged presentation on the live stream. So thank you for that. If you guys are interested in getting consultation from Kelsey, you can click her link in the description. If you want to watch a replay of this live stream, you can see that replay under the events tab in the Nonprofit Launchpad. And I don't have a graphic prepared yet, but we have an incredible guest next week. We will have Shailene from I believe it's 414 Studio. So Shailene is actually out of Europe, and she will be helping you use social media effectively. Look, a lot of nonprofits, you're told, get on social media, get on social media, get on social media. You put up 15 posts, you get 2 likes, and you get no volunteers and no donations. She's an expert in helping you ramp up your social media so it actually works for your nonprofit. Because believe it or not, likes don't pay the bills. Likes don't feed people. Likes don't necessarily push your program forward. I'm really excited to have her come on next week, Friday, 12 p.m. Eastern, this coming Friday. So thank you guys so much for joining us for another expert live stream. Super happy to see you guys. Yes, it will be next week, Black Friday. So if you guys can't make it, totally understand. You guys are on a shopping spree. If you guys can have us on in the background, go for it. And we'd love to have you. So yes, next week, Black Friday, we'll be having her on. And you guys have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your weekend. See you guys next week.